The wagon door slammed shut just as the papers were thrust into her hands, and across the yard, the cowboy everyone kept their distance from stepped forward, like he'd already made a choice he hadn't spoken out loud yet. Dust rolled low across the dry, hollow road as two men waited by the gate, one holding a folded notice, the other watching the house like it already belonged to him. Lila stood on the porch, fingers tightening around the paper without looking down. She didn't step back, didn't call for help. Caleb stopped near the fence, eyes moving once from her to the men, then to the ground between them. No one spoke. The wind pressed against the door behind her, and still she held her ground. Would you have opened that door? Or let them take everything without a word? The ground in Dry Hollow had frozen hard the night before the funeral. Boots struck it with a dull, hollow sound as folks drifted away in twos and threes, collars turned up against the wind. By the time the last wagon rolled past the gate, only Caleb Rourke remained. He stood a while longer than most men would, hat in his hands, eyes on the fresh mound of dirt. His mother's quilt still lay folded over the back of a chair inside the house. He hadn't moved it. "Don't pick the one that's easy to love," she had said, voice thin but steady. "Pick the one who won't leave when everything breaks." He hadn't answered then. Just nodded once, low, like he always did. A week later, the town began its quiet work. At the church steps, Mrs. Talbot caught him between Sunday service and the hitching rail, speaking of her niece from Laramie. 2 days after, a rancher named Briggs invited him to supper, his daughter already seated at the table before Caleb had taken off his coat. At the general store, a pair of women lowered their voices just enough for him to hear names and ages and how well suited they might be. Caleb listened. He always listened. Then he'd tip his hat, say thank you, and leave before the coffee cooled. It didn't take long before the looks changed. Not anger. Not quite. Something closer to offense. By late October, the talk had settled into a shape of its own. He thinks he's too good. Men like that don't know what he wants. Or maybe he don't want anyone at all. Caleb heard it. Didn't answer it. One morning, wind pushed dust along the main road in thin, restless lines. The sign above Dillard's General Store creaked against its chain. Inside, it smelled of coffee beans, leather, and dry flour. Mr. Dillard stood behind the counter, weighing out sugar into a paper sack. He glanced up when Caleb stepped in, then went back to his scale. "You'll run out of folks willing to try, at this rate," he said after a moment. Caleb set a few coins down for coffee and a coil of rope. "I'm not asking them to try." "No," Dillard said. "You ain't asking much of anything." The old man folded the sack neatly and tied it off with twine. For a while there was only the sound of beans pouring into a tin cup. Then he spoke again, quieter this time. "There's a woman out past the north bend, near the broken cedar line." Caleb didn't look up right away. Just lifted the cup, took a slow sip. "Been there near 2 years," Dillard went on. "Took care of old Mrs. Hensley through last winter. Woman was near gone by Christmas. That girl stayed anyway. Didn't take $1. Caleb set the cup down. "What's her name?" he asked. Dillard shrugged. "Some say Johnson. Some don't say much at all." Caleb nodded once. That was all. He finished his coffee, picked up the rope and stepped back into the wind. The trail north narrowed after the last fence post. Grass grew sparse there, patches of frost still clinging in the shadows where sunlight hadn't reached. His horse moved steady beneath him, hooves pressing into dry earth with a quiet rhythm. By the time he reached the cedar line, the sky had turned a pale, washed-out blue, the kind that came before colder weather. The house sat low against the land, not much more than a wooden frame with a chimney leaning slightly to one side. Smoke drifted thin from the top. The fence nearby had given way in two places. One rail hung loose, tied with a strip of cloth that had seen better days. She was standing there, back turned, driving a nail into the wood with slow, measured strikes. Her sleeves were rolled above her wrists, despite the cold. A coil of wire rested at her feet. She didn't stop when he rode up, didn't even turn. Caleb swung down from the saddle, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He rested one hand on the horn of the saddle and watched. She set another nail, pulled the wire tight, bent it clean. There was no rush in her movements, no wasted motion either. Wind pressed against the open land, carrying the faint scent of pine and cold iron. "You've got a break along the far post," Caleb said after a while. She didn't look at him, just followed the line of the fence with her eyes, as if measuring it in her head. "I know," she said. Her voice was low, even. "No welcome. No question." Caleb nodded. That was enough. He stepped past her, crouched near the broken post, and pressed it back into place. The wood shifted under his weight. He didn't force it, just adjusted, slow and careful, until it settled. Behind him, the hammer kept its steady rhythm. For a few minutes, that was all there was. Wind, wood, iron. Then the sound came. Hoofbeats, fast and uneven. Caleb straightened before the rider broke through the trees. A boy, no more than 12, leaned low over his horse's neck, breath coming sharp and ragged. "Miss Lila!" he shouted, pulling hard on the reins as the horse skidded to a stop near the fence. She froze, just for a second. Then she turned. Caleb saw her face for the first time. Not fear. Not yet. Something tighter, like a door held shut. "They're coming back," the boy said, voice cracking as he tried to catch his breath. This time they got papers, real ones. The hammer slipped from her hand and hit the ground. The wind didn't change. The land didn't move. But something had shifted. And Caleb, standing there with dirt on his hands and a half-mended fence between them, felt it settle into place. The boy slid off his horse, boots hitting the ground too hard, like he hadn't meant to stop so fast. "They're already past the ridge," he said, looking at Lila, not Caleb. "3 of 'em, wagon too." Lila bent, picked up the hammer, and set it back on the rail like it belonged there. Her hands were steady again. "Thank you, Ben," she said. The boy nodded once, then turned his horse without another word and rode back the way he came. For a moment, the land went quiet again. Wind brushed through the broken fence. A loose board tapped slow against a post. Caleb wiped his hands on his jeans and looked toward the road. "You expecting them?" he asked. Lila pulled the wire tight around the last nail and twisted it clean. "I was expecting something," she said. That was all. She stepped past him and headed toward the house. Caleb followed, not close, not far, just enough to see what came next. The front door stood open a few inches. Inside, the air carried the faint smell of coffee gone cold and wood smoke that hadn't been fed in a while. Lila moved through the room without looking back. She set a kettle on the stove, poured water from a dented tin jug, and struck a match. The flame caught slow. Caleb stayed near the doorway. Hoofbeats came first, then the creak of wagon wheels pulling through dry dirt. They didn't rush. Didn't need to. 3 men rode up, coats clean despite the road. The wagon behind them carried a narrow chest and a rolled canvas tied with rope. One of the riders dismounted before the others had fully stopped. He brushed dust from his sleeve like it bothered him. "Miss Johnson," he said, voice calm, practiced. Lila didn't step outside. She stood just inside the door, one hand resting against the frame. "You've been told not to come back without reason," she said. We have reason, the man replied. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded set of papers. Name's Harold Finch, representing Dry Creek Land and Holdings. Caleb watched from the side, eyes moving from the man's boots to the way he held the papers. Careful, like they mattered more than anything else on him. There's been a review of outstanding debts tied to this property, Finch continued. Your father left certain obligations unresolved. Lila didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a single sheet, edges worn soft from being handled too often. She stepped forward just enough to hold it out. This was settled, she said. Finch took the paper, looked at it, then folded it once and handed it back without a word. That document doesn't reflect the full account, he said. Caleb shifted his weight slightly, the floorboard under his boot letting out a faint creak. Finch's eyes flicked toward him for the first time. And you are? He asked. Caleb didn't move, just passing through. Finch studied him a second longer than needed, then turned back to Lila. The county will be recognizing the revised amount, he said. Payment is expected before the end of the month. If not, I heard you the first time, Lila said. Her voice didn't rise, didn't shake, just cut clean through his sentence. Behind Finch, one of the other men shifted in the saddle. The leather creaked under his weight. You'll receive notice in writing, Finch went on, smoothing his coat. We'll allow time for arrangements. He tipped his hat, slight enough to mean nothing, and stepped back. The wagon turned first. Then the riders followed, slow and steady, leaving the same way they came. No dust kicked up, no hurry, like they already owned the road. The sound faded. Lila closed the door halfway, but didn't latch it. She stood there a moment, hand still on the wood. Caleb watched her shoulders rise once, then settle. You believe them? He asked. She walked back to the stove, lifted the kettle before it boiled, and poured water into a chipped cup. I believe they'll come back, she said. She set the second cup on the table without looking at him. Caleb stepped inside, just enough to take it. The coffee was thin, bitter. Outside, the sky had turned a deeper gray. By the time the first drop of rain hit the roof, Caleb was already back out near the barn. A section of the roof had lifted at one corner. Nails half pulled, wood warped from weather. He climbed up without asking, pressed the board down, set it straight, hammered it back in place with slow, even strikes. Rain came harder, running down his sleeves, soaking through his shirt. Below, Lila stood in the doorway, not calling out, not telling him to stop, just watching. When he climbed down, he didn't look for thanks, just walked past her, toward his horse. You'll ruin that coat, she said. He paused. Already have, he answered. That was enough. He mounted up and rode off into the rain. The land swallowed the sound of hooves quick. Night came early. Clouds pressed low, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth through the cracks of the house. Caleb didn't go back to town. Instead, he circled north, past the cedar line, toward the shallow creek that cut through the edge of the property. The rain had softened the ground. Tracks showed clearer than they should. Wagon wheels, fresh, not from today. He crouched beside them, running a hand over the imprint. The depth, the direction, not just passing through, stopping, working. He followed the marks a little farther until they bent toward the tree line. There, half hidden under branches, the ground had been disturbed, not by cattle, not by weather, by tools. Caleb stood slowly, rain sliding down the brim of his hat. He looked back toward the faint outline of Lila's house in the distance, then toward the trees. Something didn't sit right. And whatever those men wanted, it wasn't just land. The rain let up sometime before dawn. What it left behind clung to everything: fence posts, saddle leather, the hem of Caleb's coat. The creek ran louder than usual, water slipping over stones in a steady, restless sound. Caleb stayed near the tree line longer than he meant to. The marks in the ground didn't lie. Wagon tracks cut deep, then stopped. Boot prints crossed over them, back and forth, too many for simple surveying. He crouched again, pressing his fingers into the softened earth. Someone had been working here. Not long ago. He straightened and looked toward the house. Smoke rose thin from the chimney again. Morning had come, whether the land was ready for it or not. By the time he rode back, Lila was already outside. She had a bucket in one hand, moving toward the well. Her steps were measured, same as the day before, same as if nothing had changed. Caleb dismounted without speaking. She didn't ask where he'd been. He took the bucket from her when she reached the rope. Not quick, not forcing it. Just steady enough that she let go without a word. The pulley creaked as he drew the water up. "You ever see wagons near the North Creek?" he asked. She watched the bucket rise. "Sometimes." "More than sometimes," he said. That got her attention. She met his eyes just for a second, then looked past him toward the hills. "They came once in spring," she said. "Stayed 2 days, said they were measuring land." "They weren't measuring," Caleb said. Silence settled again. Not heavy, just there. He set the bucket down and stepped back. "What were they doing?" she asked. Caleb wiped his hands dry against his coat. "Digging." The word hung between them. Lila didn't react right away, just took the bucket and carried it toward the house. He followed. Inside, the room felt smaller than it had the day before. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was something else. She set the bucket near the stove and reached for a cloth. "My father didn't trust men with papers," she said after a while. "Kept his own records. Wrote everything down." Caleb leaned against the wall near the window. "Where are they?" She shook her head once. "Gone." "Taken?" "I don't know." She wrung the cloth tighter than she needed to. "After he died, I looked. Every drawer, every board I could pry loose. Nothing." Caleb glanced around the room. It wasn't large. Table near the window. Stove against the far wall. A narrow shelf with 2 cups and a tin plate. No place that hadn't already been touched. "You mind if I look?" he asked. She hesitated. Not long, just enough to matter. "Do what you want," she said. That was permission enough. They started with the obvious. Drawers pulled open, empty, a few letters tied with string, edges yellowed, receipts for flour, nails, lamp oil. Nothing that matched what Finch had said. Caleb moved to the far wall, pressing against the boards one by one, listening for a change in sound. Behind him, Lila lifted a loose plank near the stove. Dust rose into the air, catching the light in thin lines. Nothing. They worked without speaking. Time slipped. The wind outside softened. The house creaked now and then, settling back into itself. At one point, Caleb crossed to the table and set his hand against it. One leg shifted, just slightly. He stilled, then pressed again. There. A faint scrape underneath. He bent, lifting the table just enough to tilt it. Something small slid free and hit the floor with a dull, metallic sound. Lila turned. Caleb picked it up. A key. Old brass. Worn smooth at the edges. Lila stepped closer, slower this time. "I've seen that," she said. Her voice had changed. Not louder, just tighter. Where? Caleb asked. She didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, she moved past him, toward the back of the room where a narrow ladder led up into the loft. Up there, she said. The loft wasn't much. Low ceiling. Dust settled thick across old trunks and broken tools. A quilt folded over something in the corner. Caleb held the lantern while Lila moved ahead. She went straight to the far wall, not searching now, remembering. There, half hidden behind a tall wardrobe, was a narrow section of boards that didn't quite match the rest. She pushed the wardrobe aside with both hands. It scraped across the floor, slow and loud. Behind it, a small door. No handle, just a keyhole set deep into the wood. Lila held out her hand. Caleb placed the key in it. Her fingers closed around it, steady but not quite still. She knelt, slid the key into the lock. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a click. Soft, final. She opened the door. Inside was a wooden box, wrapped in cloth. Lila reached for it like she'd been carrying its weight for years. She pulled it free, set it on the floor between them, and lifted the lid. Papers. Stacks of them. Tied, sorted, careful. Caleb crouched beside her. She picked one up, unfolded it. Her eyes moved across the page, slower than before. Receipts, she said. Real ones. Another page. Then another. Caleb leaned closer. These numbers don't match what he showed you, he said. No, she answered. Her hand moved to the bottom of the box. There, beneath the papers, lay a folded map, and a second bundle. Names, columns of them. Caleb felt something settle deeper this time. Not just your land, he said. Lila didn't look up. No, she said quietly. Before either of them could speak again, a sound from below. Wood. Cracking. Both of them froze. Then came another, louder, from the front door. A voice followed. Calm. Familiar. Miss Johnson, Harold Finch called from downstairs. I'd advise you to open the door. Lila closed the lid of the box, held it close. Caleb set the lantern down. The house creaked again. But this time, it wasn't settling. It was being forced open. The sound came again. Wood splitting under pressure. Slow at first, then sharper. Caleb moved before thinking. One hand went to the edge of the loft ladder. The other reached for the box, but Lila already had it. She held it tight against her chest. Back way, she said. Her voice was low, but it didn't shake. Caleb nodded once. They moved together, quick but not careless. The ladder creaked under their weight as they climbed down into the narrow back passage. Dust lifted with each step. Below, the front door gave another loud crack. Miss Johnson, Finch called again, still calm, like nothing needed to be rushed. You're making this harder than it has to be. Lila didn't answer. She pushed open the rear door into the yard. Cold air rushed in. The ground was still wet from the night rain, mud pulling at their boots. They crossed toward the barn. Caleb glanced once over his shoulder. Through the front window he could see shapes moving inside now. Shadows against the wall. Too late to pretend nothing had been found. Inside the barn, the air smelled of hay and damp wood. A lantern hung from a nail near the door. Caleb lit it with a quick strike. Lila set the box on an old workbench. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Caleb turned toward the wide doors and pulled them half closed, leaving just enough space to see through. They'll search the house first, he said. Lila opened the box again. Her hands moved faster now, sorting through the papers with purpose. These are the receipts, she said. Everything my father paid. Caleb stepped beside her. "And this?" he asked, nodding toward the folded map. She hesitated, then opened it. The paper cracked along old folds, lines stretched across the valley. Not just her land, not just one section. Marks along the creek, the ridge, even near the cedar line. Caleb leaned closer. "That's where the tracks were," he said quietly. Lila traced a finger along the markings. He thought they were surveying. "They were," Caleb said, "just not for land." She looked at him. For the first time, there was something behind her eyes that hadn't been there before. Understanding. "And the names?" Caleb asked. She lifted the second bundle. Read a few lines, then stopped. "They're families," she said. "All the ones who sold or lost their land." Caleb felt the weight of it settle in. "This isn't just about you," he said. Lila closed the bundle. "No," she said. Outside, a door slammed open. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor of the house. Drawers pulled, wood scraped. They were searching. Finch's voice carried faintly through the yard. "Check the back rooms." Caleb turned toward the barn doors. "We can't stay here," he said. Lila didn't move. "If we run, they take it anyway," she said. "They'll take it if you don't." Silence. She looked down at the box, then back at the house. Her jaw tightened. Another crash sounded from inside, louder this time. "They won't stop," Caleb said. "I know." Footsteps approached outside now, closer. Gravel shifted under boots. Caleb stepped in front of her without thinking, not blocking her, just there. The barn doors creaked as someone pushed them wider. Light spilled in. Harold Finch stood in the opening, coat still clean, hat untouched by the weather. Two men behind him. His eyes moved once across the space, then settled on the box. "There it is," he said. Caleb didn't reach for his gun, didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, big enough to fill the doorway between Finch and the workbench. Finch studied him. "You're in a place that doesn't concern you," he said. Caleb didn't answer. Behind him, Lila's grip on the box tightened. Finch took a step forward, then stopped. Not because he wanted to, because Caleb hadn't moved. A long second passed. Wind pushed through the open door, carrying the smell of wet earth and cedar. "You've seen what's in there," Finch said, voice quieter now. "You understand what this is?" Caleb met his eyes. "Yeah," he said. Finch nodded slightly, like that confirmed something. "Then you know how this ends," he said. Caleb didn't move, didn't step aside. Behind him, Lila shifted her weight, just enough that he noticed. He didn't look back. Finch's patience thinned. "You think standing there changes anything?" he asked. Caleb finally spoke. "Sometimes it does." Another voice cut through the air from outside the barn. "Sometimes it does." All heads turned. A rider pulled up near the fence, then another, and another. Ezekiel Boone rode in first, hat low, shoulders set. Behind him came two more men from neighboring land, then a third. They didn't rush, didn't shout, just rode in and stopped, watching. Boone looked from Finch to Caleb, then to Lila behind him. "Seen this before," he said. "Papers don't match what folks remember." Finch's jaw tightened. "This is a legal matter," he said. Boone shrugged slightly. "Might be. Still looks the same." More riders gathered near the edge of the yard. Not many. Just enough. Finch glanced around, calculating, then back at Caleb. "This isn't over," he said. Caleb nodded once. Didn't think it was. Finch stepped back, turned. The men behind him followed. The barn doors stayed open as they left. Hoofbeats faded slower this time. No hurry, but no certainty either. The yard settled again. Boone swung down from his horse and walked a few steps closer. "You planning to keep standing there all day?" he asked Caleb. Caleb didn't answer. He stepped aside. Just enough. Lila was still holding the box. Boone looked at it once, then back at her. "You got something worth standing for," he said. She didn't reply. Didn't need to. Caleb finally turned to look at her. She met his eyes. Just for a moment, then looked away. The wind moved through the open barn, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again. No one spoke for a while. Boots shifted in the dirt. Leather creaked. A horse snorted near the fence. Then, one by one, the men drifted back the way they had come. Not in a hurry. Not in fear. Just finished with what they had seen. Ezekiel Boone was the last to leave. He paused at the gate, one hand resting on the post. "They'll push harder next time," he said without turning. Lila stood in the barn doorway, the box still in her arms. "I know," she answered. Boone nodded once and rode off. Silence settled again. Caleb stepped out into the yard, looking toward the ridge where Finch had disappeared. The sky hung low, clouds dragging shadows across the hills. Behind him, the barn door closed halfway with a soft thud. He didn't turn. "You should go," Lila said. He heard it. Didn't move. "They know you're here now," she went on. "They'll make it your problem." Caleb rubbed a thumb along the edge of his palm, dirt still caught in the lines. "It already is," he said. Another pause. Then he walked back inside. The house looked smaller than before. Drawers left open. A chair knocked sideways. Papers scattered across the floor where Finch's men had searched. Lila set the box on the table and began gathering the loose pages, stacking them in quiet order. Caleb righted the chair without asking. For a while they worked like that. No plan spoken out loud, just putting things back where they belonged. When the last paper was set aside, Lila tied the bundle tight with a strip of cloth. "We take it to town," she said. Caleb looked at her. "They won't listen," he said. "They will if they have to," she answered. He didn't argue. Morning came slow and cold. Frost edged the window glass. The stove gave off a steady, low heat. Outside, the ground had hardened again, holding the shape of every hoofprint and wagon track from the day before. They rode in without speaking much. Dry Hollow sat quiet at that hour. A few wagons near the feed store. Smoke rising from chimneys. The bell above the general store door rang once as they passed. At the county office, the door stood open. Inside, a handful of men had already gathered. Boone was there. So was Mr. Dillard, hat in his hands, standing near the wall. The sheriff stood behind the desk, flipping through a ledger like it might answer something for him. Lila walked straight to the center of the room. She set the box down, opened it. No speech, no warning, just paper after paper laid out across the desk. Receipts, dates, signatures, numbers that didn't match what Finch had brought. The room shifted. Men leaned closer. Voices dropped. Someone cleared his throat. Caleb stayed near the door, not stepping forward, not stepping back. Lila picked up one page and turned it toward the sheriff. "This was paid," she said. "Another page. And this." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The truth sat there in plain ink. Boone stepped in then, adding his own name to the pile. Then another man. And another. Different papers. Same story. The sheriff stopped flipping his ledger, looked up. For the first time since Caleb had known him, he looked uncertain. "Where'd you get these?" he asked. "My father kept them," Lila said. "And the map?" Boone added quietly. Lila didn't hesitate. She laid it out. Lines across the valley, marks near the creek, places where no one had said anything was planned. A murmur moved through the room. Someone mentioned the railroad. Someone else mentioned the families who had left. The pieces began to line up. By the time Finch stepped through the door, the room had already changed. He took in the scene at a glance. Papers spread, faces turned. His expression didn't break. "Interesting gathering," he said. No one answered. The sheriff stepped forward this time. "We need to review these claims," he said. Finch's eyes moved across the desk, then to Lila, then to Caleb. Something tightened, just for a second. Then it was gone. "You do what you think is necessary," he said. He didn't stay. Didn't argue. Just turned and walked out. The room held its breath until the door closed behind him. Days passed. Word spread faster than anyone could stop it. Men who had kept quiet began to speak. Papers came out of drawers, out of trunks, out of places they'd been hidden for years. By the end of the week, the talk wasn't quiet anymore. It was everywhere, and it wasn't going away. On the third morning, Caleb saddled his horse before the sun fully broke over the ridge. He moved slow, same as always, checked the cinch, adjusted the strap. Lila stood on the porch, watching. He didn't look up until he had the reins in his hand. "You leaving?" she said. He nodded. "Nothing tying me here," he answered. She stepped down from the porch, walked across the yard, stopped a few feet from him. "You could stay," she said. It wasn't a question. Caleb looked at her, then past her, toward the fence he'd fixed, the barn, the house, everything that had almost been taken. "You don't need me to," he said. She held his gaze. A long second passed, then another. "You didn't save me," she said. Caleb didn't answer. "You just didn't leave," she went on. The wind moved between them, lifting the edge of her sleeve. Caleb's hand tightened slightly on the reins, then loosened. He stepped past her, walked toward the house. Later that day, the fence line stood straighter. The roof didn't lift in the wind, and when the evening came, there were 2 cups on the table. The door stayed open a little longer than it used to, long enough for the air to move through, long enough for something to settle. Not fast, not loud, but steady, like it meant to stay. And maybe that was the thing Caleb had been searching for all along. Not a woman who needed saving, not a life that looked easy from the outside, but something that could hold, even when the ground shifted underneath it. Lila never asked him to stay, and he never promised he would, but every morning after that, there was work to be done. A fence to mend, a roof to check before the wind turned, coffee poured into 2 cups without a word spoken first. Out there in Dry Hollow, nothing came easy. Not land, not trust. Not the kind of quiet that settles between 2 people who have seen what things cost. But it held. And sometimes, that's more than enough. Because love, the kind that lasts, doesn't arrive loud. It shows up in small choices. In staying when leaving would be simpler. In standing beside someone, not in front of them. So if you had been in Caleb's place, would you have ridden on, or chosen to stay? And if this story stayed with you a little longer than expected, there are more like it waiting. Stories about people who find something real in the hardest places and decide it's worth holding on to.